A warm welcome to The World Today. I'm Joke Rogers. Here's what's coming up on the program. We're learning more about the people on board the missing Titanic submersible. Romanian prosecutors charge internet personality Andrew Tate, his brother and two others for human trafficking, rape and forming a criminal gang to sexually exploit women. Plus, international donors pledged nearly $1.5 billion in humanitarian aid for Sudan and the broader region. Stay with us as The World Today begins right now. We begin with updates on the missing tourist submersible that was supposed to provide passengers a close enough view of the wreck of the famous Titanic. We're learning British-Pakistani businessman Shahzada Dawood and his son Suleiman are two of the 5 people on board. The Dawood family is one of Pakistan's richest. Mr. Dawood is a trustee of the Tate Institute, an organization researching the origins and prevalence of life and intelligence in the universe. Another set of passengers is British businessman and explorer Hamish Harding. French explorer Paul-Henri Nargeolet is also said to be on board the missing submarine. He's a former diver for the French Navy and was part of the first expedition to visit the wreck in 1987, just 2 years after it was found. Crew members are thought to have at most just 4 days' worth of oxygen left, so it's a race against time finding the supposed passengers. Only few submersibles capable of taking people 4,000 meters below the ocean surface exist. The company behind the expedition, Ocean Gate, says it's one of the only private companies in the world that has one. Meanwhile, founder of the White Desert Antarctica, which organizes expeditions to the frozen continent, Patrick Wood, says that he's praying that Harding and the other passengers are found safe and sound. Contact with the small sub was lost about an hour and 45 minutes into its dive to the wreck site off the coast of Newfoundland, Canada, on Sunday. In the meantime, U.S. and Canadian ships and planes have been on the search for the missing sub since Sunday. They have swarmed the area about 900 miles east of Cape Cod, some dropping sonar buoys that can monitor to a depth of 13,000 feet.
We were notified by the operator of the submersible vessel that it was overdue, and it had 5 persons on board the submersible. So we're working very closely at this point to make sure that we're doing everything that we can do to locate the submersible and rescue those on board. The location of the search is approximately 900 miles east of Cape Cod in a water depth of roughly 13,000 feet. It is a remote area. And it is a challenge to conduct a search in that remote area, but we are deploying all available assets to make sure that we can locate the craft and rescue the people on board. We understand from the operator of the vessel that the vessel was designed with a 96-hour sustainment capability if there was an emergency on board. And so we're using that time, making the best use of every moment of that time to locate the vessel. We've subsequently coordinated with the Canadian Coast Guard and Canadian Armed Forces to deploy additional assets to the scene. The Canadians have had a C-130 aircraft searching as well, in addition to also having a P-8 submarine search aircraft deploy as well, and put sonar buoys in the water in attempt to listen. Again, right now our focus is getting on as much capability into the area as we can and understanding that full capability of those assets that are being deployed. Our aerial assets that are being deployed have the capability to do both visual and radar searches, and the Canadians' asset had the ability to drop sonar buoys and listen, and so we're using all that information to improve our search capability. certainly every time ships go to sea, they encounter hazards and dangers, and so having properly prepared vessels, properly prepared crew members, and making sure that you practice emergency procedures, good practical advice for anybody that goes to sea.
And one marine expert, Alistair Gregg, says rescuers do not know whether the submersible is floating just below the water's surface or submerged at the bottom of the ocean. He says if the crew are at the bottom, then a robot vessel may have to be sent down to bring the whole craft to the surface, also adding that there are precious few such robots in existence. One pilot and 4 passengers were on board the submersible that went missing on Sunday after taking off from Canada's Atlantic coast. According to the U.S. Coast Guard, the vessel could stay underwater for up to 96 hours.
Submersible was in mid-dive when they lost communications, so if there was any sort of emergency, they would have probably just dropped their weights and this buoyancy would have brought them back up to the surface. But of course, with no communications, then it's difficult to locate where they are. As it's a submersible, it's neutrally buoyant, so it's not like a boat. It sits on the water. It'll be mostly just below the surface. It's only just a small amount above it. And the crew are inside the submersible, and they can't get out. They require someone to undo the bolts from the outside, so they can't get out of the vehicle. This thing is about the size of a large transit van, about 7 meters long, white, so it's going to be quite difficult to spot it from the air. It's very unlikely it's somewhere in the water column. It's either on the top or on the bottom. If it's on the bottom, it's much more difficult to locate it. Don't know what the topology is like, whether it's smooth or it's rough. It could be in humps or hollows. And there's all the other wreckage from the Titanic around there as well, which will send back signals.
Well, another expert focused on the Titanic shipwreck and who is also an experienced deep submersible diver says he hopes for a positive outcome to the search. Larry Daly is a Titanic historian who once spent 12 hours touring the wreckage on a submarine. He said he's hopeful for the missing vessel because of high-tech equipment that can keep passengers alive for several hours.
Deep submersible diving is very dangerous, but it's high tech, and as each year goes by, the equipment gets better, the technology gets better, and so on. So I'm very hopeful and very positive. I was in the sub for 12 hours. We have our own breathing system on board, and if that's maintained properly, like changing your filter on your CO2 scrubber, you can stay down there for quite a few hours. And in our case, I was down there for 12 hours total time in the sub. And the new technology obviously can extend that too, right?
So let's learn more about this. Here's what we've been learning so far. The submersible known as the Polar Prince arrived near the location of the Titanic wreck in the Atlantic Ocean on Sunday morning. Hamish Harding, who was on the Titan, said that they expected to start the dive in the submersible at 4 a.m. local time. However, the Boston Coast Guard, which is leading the search operation, said on Twitter that the 5-person crew submerged Sunday morning and the crew of the Polar Prince lost contact with them approximately 1 hour and 45 minutes into the vessel's dive. The Coast Guard has sent 2 C-130 Hercules aircraft to search for the submersible on the surface of the water and has been joined by a Canadian C-130 and a P-8 aircraft equipped with underwater sonar capability. Sonar buoys are also being deployed in the area. Rear Admiral John Morga of the U.S. Coast Guard said it will need additional expertise to rescue the vessel if it was found underwater, and he was reaching out for help, including to the U.S. Navy and the private sector. Canada's Defense Department said that, along with the aircraft, the Canadian Coast Guard vessel Coppet Hobson is assisting in the search. Welcome back to the program. We move straight to this breaking news out of the United States. President Joe Biden's son, Hunter Biden, is reportedly expected to plead guilty to 2 misdemeanor tax crimes and admit to illegally possessing a gun while being a drug user after a 5-year investigation. The U.S. attorney in Delaware has filed papers indicating a plea agreement has been reached. He's expected to agree to drug treatment and monitoring. The terms of the agreement are likely to keep keep him out of jail. The proposed deal would still need to be approved by a judge. It's unclear when Hunter Biden will appear in court to enter his guilty plea. 53-year-old Biden has previously worked as a lawyer and a lobbyist, including abroad in China and Ukraine. He was discharged from the U.S. Navy in 2014 after testing positive for cocaine. Let's bring in our Washington correspondent, Maria Burr, to talk some more about this. Maria, great to see you today.
Good to see you as well.
So what more do we know about these charges brought against Hunter Biden?
These charges, as you mentioned a little earlier, have been under investigation for quite some time now. This was even a part of what was discussed during Biden's campaign to the White House. And so we know that Hunter Biden has been what many have called a potential challenge for the president. But obviously that did not stop him from reaching the point of being able to be the next president for the U.S. But this, I think, is going to be a potential challenge. We are heading up against the next election cycle. We're looking at some very serious charges. We know that when you talk about tax issues, you talk about not paying taxes, potential tax invasion. That's something that has been brought forth for the former President Trump. And so, as you said, and as we know, the Republicans are going to hold very clear to that and going to focus in again on how this is very similar and how he must be treated the same way the former president has been treated with this issue. But as you said, and as it has been reported, that he has pleaded guilty to that, and there's also a gun charge involved in this as well, which I think is going to be a major concern, as we know before that there has been conversations and challenge with him as it relates to drug usage. And so as we know that potentially treatment could be the next step. But this is something the president will likely stay away from initially, but we could see him having to come out to speak on this issue.
As you said, this is, probably what the Republicans and also Trump followers have been harping on for months now. Is this a win for them?
This is somewhat of a win, but to be very honest, those who are supporters of President Biden have known that this is something that has been looming for quite some time now. They have watched, they still voted for President Biden during the campaign season when this was an issue that was brought forth. So I don't think it's going to deter those voters. We also know that those who are supporters of President Trump are not using his personal challenges to not support him. So I don't think that this is necessarily going to stop those from coming out to vote. The issue is going to be those who are middle of the road voters, those voters who have not yet decided on who they're voting for. But it's very likely that if someone is not going to vote for President Biden because of this, they also will not vote for President Trump. So I don't think this is going to necessarily put any win factors as it relates to President Trump. Now, maybe potentially other Republicans are running for office, but the question is, will they make it to becoming the representative for the Republican Party and having that Republican ticket at those mainstream elections?
And this is sure to taint the Biden presidency. What has the president said about this, and how far could this go to scuttle not only Joe Biden's plans for running again in 2024, but also the Democratic Party's chances at the presidential election?
The president will most likely continue his pursuit of being reelected and campaigning. This will likely not stop that. What it will have a challenge with, though, is personally. Obviously, we can't take away from the fact that this is something that is going to impact his family. And so how will that impact the president as it relates to his work, his, going out to campaign? Will he have to add in commentary about that when he does his campaign speeches? Will that change some of the narrative that he will be presenting for this next campaign cycle? So that's, I think, where we're going to see. But is it going to stop him? I don't think it's going to stop him from running for re-election. Are the Democrats going to then look in another direction because of this? I don't think that they are. The Democrats are very well aware that this was probably going to come down to this at some point. This has been a very long investigation, so I don't think this is going to at all move the DNC from supporting the current president if he is the candidate for the Democratic Party.
Maria, thanks again for that update. Well, Well, in other news, the headquarters of the Paris 2024 Olympics Organizing Committee was searched by police today. Organizers say the search was ordered by the French National Financial Prosecutor's Office. Paris 2024 did not give any further details. The Olympics will be held from July 26th through to August the 11th, with the Paralympic Games taking place from August the 28th through to September the 6th. And some good news for football-loving fans. France captain Kylian Mbappe made history on Monday after he scored his side's Euro 2024 qualifiers against Greece. Mbappe scored the only goal of the encounter as France defeated Greece 1-0 at the Stade de France. His goal against Greece means the Paris Saint-Germain forward has now become France's best ever overall goal scorer over a single season after netting his 54th strike, which is one more than the late, great Just Fontaine's tally in 1958. The 24-year-old converted his second penalty attempt to give France the victory over Greece. The goal was also his 40th overall for the France national team in 70 caps. We're staying in Europe as Romanian prosecutors charge social media influencer Andrew Tate with rape, human trafficking and forming an organized crime group to sexually exploit women. Andrew is not the only one charged with these crimes. His brother and 2 other people have been charged as well. The first time the Tate brothers were arrested at their Bucharest home in 2022. They were moved from custody to house arrest following a ruling by a Romanian judge. The indictment deposited with the Bucharest court says that the 4 defendants formed an organized criminal group in 2021 to commit human trafficking in Romania, but also in other countries, including the US and UK. It names 7 alleged victims, which it says were recruited by the Tate brothers through false promises of love and marriage. The trial is expected to take several years. Let's get more on this. Our London correspondent, Juliana Olayinka, joins us now. Hi, Juliana. Great to see you.
Good afternoon, Joker.
Right, so the arrests have been quite controversial. I know the Tate brothers have disagreed with the charges and disputed the so-called witnesses against them. They were even arrested in Romania before any charges were brought against them. So, do we understand how the Romanian prosecutors came up with the charges of rape, human trafficking and the organized crime group?
Well, unfortunately, we don't, because, of course, we're not the lawyers. I suppose that they're going to have to go through that detail. And, of course, this is an ongoing criminal investigation. So unless we are told any information, it's pretty difficult to ascertain exactly what Romanian prosecutors have got to nail the pretty controversial Tate brothers. As you said, they were initially arrested on the 29th of December in 2022. They actually spent 3 months incarcerated in a Romanian prison. They were only released in late March, and they've been under house arrest since that time. And now I do believe that the Tate brothers, contrary to what we've seen on social media, were actually informed of the potential of this case going to trial. They were then hauled back on the 12th of June by Romanian prosecutors, where they were told that this case isn't going anywhere. What we do know, Joker, is that when they were initially arrested alongside 2 other local Romanian females, one of them actually is a former police officer, that there were 6 women that were speaking out against them since they were released from jail. I believe a 7th woman has come forward and said, you know, that they were exploited by these individuals, one of whom says that he was raped by Andrew Tate. So these allegations are, of course, pretty serious, and it is going to be a headache for Romanian prosecutors who have have never in their history undergone a criminal investigation that has so much world attention. In fact, you were just talking about Hunter Biden's arrest. If you go on social media, which I've just had a look at, Joker, Andrew Tate is trending much higher than him because he is so much of a polarizing figure. On the one hand, you have feminists on the left who are happy to see the demise of his popularity. But then I think, very importantly, you can't knock or forego or forsake those on the right. Andrew Tate is seen as a figure of masculine toxic masculinity, and there are several men across the world, including some pretty famous, pretty revered men, who are out supporting Andrew Tate, and they do believe that this is some sort of political conspiracy against him.
And so in trying to clear his name, Andrew, I believe, agreed to an interview with the BBC, but even that was rather controversial. How invested is the British press in this story?
Very much so, very much invested, Joker. Not just the British press, as I was saying, it's trending across the world press, every media outlet, including Channels TV, are talking about it because he is a polarizing figure. He is a dual national, US, UK. I believe he was born in Washington. He is mixed race. And then his mother moved to Luton, which is just north of London, when him and his brother Tristan were still very small. He was a professional kickboxer, of course, but he gained popularity when he went on to another popular reality show in Nigeria, Big Brother. Used to be very popular in the UK, but he was soon cancelled because he had some pretty extreme misogynist views that British viewers were not used to hearing. He was then swiftly banned on social media platforms such as Facebook, TikTok and Twitter, but then he got a new lease of life before the end of last year after Elon Musk's $44 billion takeover. In fact, quite interestingly, Joker, since his arrest on the 29th of December, his Twitter following has jumped by over 2.1 million. That's just how popular he is. And I think at the moment there is a divide across the world about the LGBTQ plus movement and masculinity, and Andrew Tate seems to be speaking on behalf of males who do feel like they don't want to cry in the bathroom if they've had an argument with their boss. They don't want to subscribe to some LGBTQ plus agendas that are being pushed through by the mainstream media. So I think the BBC interview that he had, which pretty much failed for him and I think for the BBC, it was a lose-lose situation in that he kind of has used that interview to say, look, they don't want to talk about anything other than these horrific crimes that I've been accused of. And bearing in mind, it's worth saying that Tristan, Andrew, along with the two other female co-defendants, are all denying all of these allegations. Again, he believes that because he has been the poster boy for toxic masculinity, that he is being unfairly punished. However, those who are completely against Andrew Tate and what he stands for says, look, let's take away all of the sentiment here. He runs a pretty successful sex cam business. He's been making millions and millions of pounds off the back of women, most of whom are getting into, we believe most of whom are getting into it because they have no options of their own. So it's very, very difficult, and we shall just have to wait and see what happens. As I said, we're not even sure yet whether or not this is going to go to trial. I believe the Romanian judiciary system is pretty bureaucratic, pretty complex. He first heard about the fact that this is going to go to trial on June 12th. I believe a judge has until Wednesday to announce whether or not the legalities of this trial are even fair. And then I believe there is a 60-day wait. It is pretty complex and pretty complicated. And during that time, Andrew Tate is gaining more followers on Twitter. If you go to Twitter now, he's retweeting all of his support. He does believe this is a conspiracy against them. But again, this is a much wider argument now about where we are in the global north around these conversations about men who like being quite masculine and who don't subscribe to some views that mainstream media are pushing. And yes, Andrew Tate certainly thinks he's a victim of that.
Right. I mean, this trial, Juliana, could take years. And I was going to ask you that, could he ever recover from the reputation he has built before the arrest? But now you've just put it out there that his reputation is actually, being built up, is getting more popular by the day. But do you think that this trial could ever damage his reputation as we speak?
It's likely, and I think, the Romanian prosecutors are hitting him where it hurts. I believe during the arrest, just before the new year, they seized about $80,000 in cash. During this latest announcement, I believe 15 luxury watches were taken, 15 luxury cars, a slew of luxury houses. His Bitcoin wallet has been removed. So certainly his portrayal on social media is a muscly man who likes smoking cigars and hanging around with, scantily clad women, and he has a lot of money. But slowly that money is starting to come away from him and slip away from his hands. And I'm telling you, having watched this case over the past few months, you did see him slightly looking broken. They managed to get into his head, and I think that's where they're going now. So as his social media following increases, and as everybody around the world talk about him, including you, Jocker, and myself, Juliana, he is increasing in some ways, but in terms of the money, which is what's attracting these young boys to his popularity, they're hitting him hard. And if this does last a couple of years, it's going to cost him millions.
Right, Juliana, thank you so much again for your update.
Thank you very much.
Welcome back to the program. Spokesperson for the United Nations Secretary General Farhan Haq says the U.S. is deeply concerned over the Israeli government's decision to alter settlement planning and speed expansion in occupied West Bank. Speaking to a news conference, Mr. Haq echoed the special coordinator for the Middle East peace process remarks on the issue and reiterated the lack of legacy validity of those settlements, adding that they were an obstacle to a two-state solution and comprehensive peace. Most countries deem Jewish settlements built on land Israel occupied in a 1967 Middle East war as illegal, and the expansion has for decades been among the most contentious issues between Israel, the Palestinians, and the international community.
Tor Venesland, the special coordinator for the Middle East peace process, today said that he was deeply concerned by the Israeli government's decision yesterday to alter settlement planning procedures that have been in place since 1996, which is expected to expedite settlement expansion. He is also alarmed by the anticipated advancement next week of over 4,000 settlement housing units by Israeli planning authorities. We reiterate that the establishment by Israel of settlements in the Palestinian territory occupied since 1967, including East Jerusalem, has no legal validity and constitutes a flagrant violation under international law. Mr. Venesland urged the government of Israel to halt and reverse such decisions, which are a major obstacle to the achievement of the two-state solution and a just, lasting, and comprehensive peace. Well, the Secretary General has been involved in talking to a range of leaders on this, and he will continue to do so. From his standpoint, one of the crucial things is that people need to abide by international law. And we've made it very clear and repeatedly clear that settlements in the Palestinian territory, in the occupied Palestinian territory, are not legally valid and constitute a flagrant violation of international law. I do expect we will have a statement in the Secretary General's name on this later today.
But there are no consequences for Israel repeating.
Well, parents of students missing after an attack on a school in western Uganda flocked to the location of the local police station on Monday to submit DNA samples that could identify their children among the 42 bodies that have been recovered. One of Uganda's biggest massacres in recent decades occurred last Friday at Lubriba Secondary School. Assailants set a dormitory full of boys on fire, then attacked a dormitory full of girls, hacking victims to death death with machetes and knives. 6 students were also abducted by the attackers, who the authorities say were fighters from an Islamic State-affiliated group based across the border in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo. Regional Police Commander Tate Ramadan said many of the dead bodies were charred beyond recognition, forcing investigators to use DNA samples from relatives to try to identify them.
20 were claimed, the ones which are easily identifiable. Those ones who got banned, unfortunately, beyond recognition. We are using scientific method of using the DNA. And in that, we have got samples from both the bodies, and we are getting samples from the relatives of the missing students, such that we can identify the body to the family, to the right family, such that the bodies can be taken for decent burial.
Well, international donors have pledged close to $1.5 billion in humanitarian aid for Sudan and the broader region. This is roughly half the $3 billion the UN says it needed. Among the biggest donors were Germany, the United States and Qatar. The UN also says it's setting aside another $22 million for the most urgent needs. The war between Sudan's army and the paramilitary rapid support forces began in mid-April. It sparked amid ongoing tensions over an internationally backed plan for a transition towards elections under a civilian government.
I am particularly concerned by reports of gender-based and sexual violence and by the ethnic dimension of the violence in Geneva. Targeted attacks against civilians based on their ethnic identities could amount to crimes against humanity.
Let's talk about the environment now. Artists have expressed their concerns and hopes about the environment using art. We'll see more of it in this next report happening at London's Hayward Gallery. Take a listen.
The exhibition is inspired by Nigerian-born artist Otobo Nkanga's suggestion of caring is a form of resistance, and her work, including the triffication, the roots of a naturally fallen chestnut tree interwoven with ropes linking 3 glass biospheres.
This exhibition is called Dear Earth, Art and Hope in a Time of Crisis. And the premise was to ask artists to reframe, recontextualize the climate change today and connect to Mother Earth, our Earth.
Among the pieces on display is 5-meter high The Living Pyramid by Hungarian-born US artist Agnes Dinis, which is planted with grasses and wildflowers, as well as US artist Jenny Kendler's sculpture, Birds Watching the Third, which shows the eyes of 100 bird species that are nearing extinction because of climate change.
You will see drawings, paintings, installation, music, embroidery, huge sculptures, a living sculpture, a pyramid of flowers, which Agnes Dennis has done, and outside eyes of extinct birds. So it's very much about fauna, animals, people, and our world today.
This exhibition takes a slightly different route. It becomes a more emotional, personal response.
I feel this exhibition is important for younger generations too, that people have eco-anxiety, that we don't want to add to that. Actually, if anything, we want to actually talk about, have a talking point, a conversation. So the exhibition is laid out like a conversation. All the artists in the shows have their own room, their own constellations of practice, but each is in conversation with another artist. So it's a welcoming environment to discuss these issues.
The show, which opens on June the 21st and runs until September the 3rd, is the latest to address environmental concerns. But Thomas said he wanted to cover a compassionate, hopeful way forward.
At least 100 structures have been either damaged or destroyed by a powerful tornado in Mississippi in the United States. Several high school buildings in the area reported roof and interior water damage. Video images showed walls ripped off the side of buildings and front yards buried under fallen trees and debris. The tornado tore down roof, trees and power lines and caused flooding in some streets. The tornado followed a weekend of severe storms across the state that left thousands without electricity. At least one person died and about 24 people were injured after the tornado hit the town of Loin in central Mississippi late Sunday. A dangerous heat wave had recently helped spawn deadly tornadoes in Texas and Florida and threatened to bring more extreme weather to the U.S. South over the long Juneteenth weekend. Officials say at least 4 people were killed in twisters that touched down on Thursday in Texas and Florida, where flooding also forced almost 150 people out of their homes. India's authorities have begun an investigation after local newspapers reported at least 54 people died in a district in the northern Indian state of Uttar Pradesh over the last few days, while another 45 people died in neighboring Bihar state. The Indian Meteorological Department issued a red alert warning last week for extreme heat in some regions of the country, including Uttar Pradesh and Bihar. The government said it was investigating the cause of the deaths that occurred over the past week in Uttar Pradesh state, but did not confirm the number of deaths. Meanwhile, local residents in the states of Uttar Pradesh and Bihar continued with their daily routines in spite of the high temperatures. Many covered their heads and faces with pieces of clothing while walking outdoors, as others kept themselves hydrated. Meat lovers' dream occurred in Argentina at the Federal Grill Master Championship hosted in Buenos Aires on Monday. In the contest, now in its 5th edition, the country's best grillers from all across Argentina gathered in the nation's capital to battle it out for the title of the country's top grill master. The grill masters were tasked to grill up a traditional Argentine asado, and they were all given the same cuts of meat and extras to work with, including beef, chorizo, sausages, fish, lamb, provoleta, and vegetable. A total number of 24 people competed in the contest near Buenos Aires landmark Obelisk. Argentina is famous for its parillas and asado culture and for having some of the best beef in the world. Well, that's where we close the program today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Jacka Rogers.